I think we're ready to go. So I'm just going to, just a show of hands, who's played Dragon Age Inquisition? I thought there would be more than that. Good grief. All right, I'm just going to give you a little bit of a flavor of what it's all about with this movie, and then we will go. There should be sound. There should be sound. Shall I pause it and start again? Is that good? See, never bank on a big intro, right? It's just... Oh, sorry, you can't hear me either? I can hear me. I will start from the beginning. You have missed nothing. We will recommence. We could just go straight to the breakout room and carry it on from there if you like. Try again? Okay, let's go. So forget everything I said. We'll start again. Should we just screw the movie and get on with the talk? Yeah, let's do that. Let's do that. We'll try it at the end and see if it works. Can everyone hear me? No. My God, this is a disaster, isn't it? My first ever talk at GDC, and it's a disaster already. I mean, thank you, thank you. Presentation. Oh, no, we're good, we're good. All right, here we go. All right, I'm Neil Thompson. I'm the Director of Art and Animation for BioWare. I'm based up in Edmonton. It's about minus, I don't know, probably 50 up there right now, so this is a welcome change. It's great to be at GDC. I think more than anything else, I've come here for many years now, and I think what it gives you is a wonderful perspective on an industry. When you work in a studio with maybe 200 guys and girls, you don't really get an idea of how big the industry actually is and how many creative individuals there are working within it. And then you come to San Francisco in March, and there's thousands of people prowling the streets, and they all do what you do, and it's fantastic, and it's really rewarding, and I think it's a really creative boost to people to go back to their studio and take all that positive energy. I've been here all day looking at watching the presentations, and there's been some fantastic ones. I think Alessandro's from Ninja Theory was absolutely brilliant. Grant doing the procedural work, and Rob talking about cinematography, and there's bits of all of those in this. It was originally an hour-long presentation. I've kind of crammed it into half an hour, so we're just going to rock on through these slides, and I'm just going to randomly, spout. So.
Did you want me to try and get the audio working for your video?
We'll do it at the end.
Okay.
We'll do it at the end.
At the end, you want to do it?
Yeah, sure. Okay. What is the premise of Dragon Age? The premise of Dragon Age is that magic is a dangerous thing, so that people who use it become corrupted, and it's this corruption that ultimately leads people to do evil things. And when we're talking about the art direction of Dragon Age, that's what we keep in mind. So it's very much steeped in sort of medieval history. And this idea of memento mori, remember you will die, this was very prevalent in medieval times because they had plague and death, and it was generally an unpleasant place to live. But what it bred was a lot of very creative artwork that dealt with the subject of death in a kind of playful manner. And it's that kind of playful sense of impending doom that hangs over the game and informs the art direction. So what is art direction? Technology does not dictate art direction. When we come to games conferences like this, there's a lot of talks about engines and tools and systems and so forth, but that's not art direction. The slide we have here, one of these is generally regarded as the high spot of Western art, and the other is the Mona Lisa, right? They're both done in the same medium, the medium of oils. So let's look a bit closer about oils as a medium. Now, when we were talking about doing Dragon Age Inquisition, if anyone's played Dragon Age 2, that was done on BioWare's previous engine. This was the Eclipse engine. It was an internal graphical solution. And I think anyone who's played that game will kind of agree that it was sort of, it was getting a bit dusty. It had seen better days. So we were approaching this by using Frostbite, which is DICE's engine that they used to do the Battlefield games. And really, you can draw a parallel between the Northern Renaissance and the artists working with oil, which was a new medium at that time, and BioWare trying to get to grips with Frostbite, which was a new engine, no experience of it before, very little documentation, as is always the case. But what it gives you primarily is very good surface response. So the way light falls on materials, and that's really what we wanted to get into. These are two works by Hans Holbein the Younger. It's his portraits of Thomas More and Erasmus of Rotterdam. See if you learned something today. And what you'll notice about these works is that what the medium of oil allowed him to produce was a much better realization of the materials on these characters. So the fur looks like fur, the skin has a real feeling to it. It's not photorealistic, because these are clearly still paintings, but the realization of the material work is photorealistic. Sorry, no, not photorealistic, more realistic, right? It's real to life without being photorealistic. And that's where we took our inspirations from. Sorry? It's starting to feed back. I can't talk any louder, I'll be shouting. That's not, is this actually on? Is this on? Sure, why not? Does that mean everyone missed the mistake I made on the last slide? So that's good if no one heard it. Are we on this one now? And they're filming this as well, my God. Okay, we good? Everyone hear me? Hey! We could go back to the beginning and start again if you like. That'd be great. Okay, so we can analyze these images and start to take kind of color and palette representations from them, and this can inform the work that we do. Actually, I can hear myself now, so that's better. So then we put it in the hands of the concept artists, and with all these influences going around, they start to produce their work. And what the concept art is looking to do is represent the world of Dragon Age, taking its cues from the works of the great masters of the Northern Renaissance. So, sense of epic, aspirational fantasy, because that's what everyone wants to see. But also, what is central to the themes of Dragon Age is the story and the characters, because you can't have an engaging RPG without that side of things. And the concept art has to reflect that, and it has to create a world that is both lush and vivid, but also interesting, and has something going on that drags you in and makes you want to play and inhabit it. So it's a visually rich and diverse world. It can be bleak. It can be romantic. It can be threatening. And it can be epic. And it can certainly be intriguing and rich and colorful, grand and populous, weird and otherworldly, and of course there's got to be dragons. So that's a broad sort of look at most of the worlds that are involved. And I think there's a huge amount of disparity in there. There's a huge amount of variation in the worlds. But they all kind of sit within that central tenet of looking back at those early Northern Renaissance paintings that used color and surface response to create a beautiful visual image. And I think Rob was talking earlier on, if you were here, about this idea that we still view these medium in a frame. And what the art directors and I were talking about, well, Matt Goldman is the art director on Dragon Age, and what he and I spoke of a lot during this phase was what is the final frame and who takes responsibility for that? And that is the art director's prime role. We talked a little bit about team building over the course of the day. And I think what team building means more than anything else is trust. You build a team and you have a lot of talented creative individuals, and as an art director, or even a director of art and animation, you have to trust those individuals to be able to interpret your creative vision. And then it's your job to make sure that they sit in that final frame in a cohesive manner. So we do the same thing with characters. There's a lot of characters in Dragon Age. And really what we're trying to do is build an interesting character through the shape and the profile of their faces, and to really try and give a sense of their character through that design. So Cassandra, she's very hard, very spiky personality, and that's reflected in the design. There's a lot of sharp angles there within the face from the eyebrows, the bone structure, it's all angled and sharp. And then when we got to the point where we wanted to take screenshots and start releasing images of the followers in Dragon Age, we wanted very much to represent them in the same way that reflects their character. So Cole is he's basically a ghost. That's a bit of a spoiler if you haven't played the game. But we want to give them that sort of mysterious air. So the first images that were released try to capture that. So Liliana is the spy master. She looks kind of spy-y there. I don't know if that's a word. And of course, there's Sarah, who's a little bit more flighty and humorous, and we wanted to give that with a sort of more bright environment. And then Vivienne, who's got that very regal Orlesian look to her, and there's a bit more of the golden light going on. But of course, it's a story-led RPG, so you need to laugh. And if you don't have the characters and you don't have the story, there's no humor to it. And I think this is one of the single greatest pieces of concept art ever created. Because if you can't laugh at that, and I think it wonderfully illustrates Dragon Age and the themes of Dragon Age in that, yeah, it's very dark and it's kind of the end of the world, but there's humor in it, and there's a kind of playful humor that, you know, BioWare as an organization likes to play with. And if you've ever played any of the Dragon Age games, if you look hard enough, you know, there's the little Easter eggs of the cheese and so forth. And it's just, you know, it's games, right? You can't take it too seriously. I think it's very important that when we're in the studio, we take our work extremely seriously, but you can't take yourselves too seriously. I think if you do that, then, you know, then you're on the wrong side of pretentiousness, right? And I like to get pretty pretentious. So you need to cry, you need to laugh, and you need to chop their faces off, which is exactly what we're going to do. How much time we got? Okay, we can also start to think about visual design in terms of the factions of Dragon Age. So we're lucky in a sense in that Dragon Age has a pre-existing world. You know, there was Dragon Age Origins 2, there's several novels, there was a movie. So there's a lot to fall back on in terms of the lore so that we can understand it, and it helps inform the character design and the art direction of the game. So we gather our contextually relevant reference. So this is the Chantry. They're very austere, so their uniforms and their design reflects that. We hear a lot about people talking about silhouette and color balance and color theory, and this all goes into the thinking of it so that you can distinguish between the various factions. We have the Qunari as well. We were looking at a lot of Nordic reference for some of this stuff. There's some great kind of churches built out there in Scandinavia that are, you know, huge, heavy wooden structures, quite unlike anything you see in the rest of Europe, really. And that's great stuff to inform the look of these things. We've got the Elysians. You know, this is extravagant, excessive. We're thinking along the lines of Versailles. You know, plenty of opulence, candlelight, gold, lots of curvy stuff. And then, of course, there's the Tevinter, which is Matt's personal favorite because it's all spiky, angular, and aggressive. And I think one of the pillars of Inquisition that he set out was that it was pointy and grey. So if you play the game and you go into and see the Tevinter architecture, you know, it's huge, spiky kind of stuff, and that's reflected in their not only in their architecture but also in the costumes and the character design. And then, of course, we've got the Inquisition itself, which is an interesting kind of contrast because you play the Inquisitor in the game. So ostensibly you're the hero, but yet a lot of their sort of regalia and design is done in a very oppressive fashion. You know, there's the Persuader fist there to break down castle walls. There's the eye motif, which is central to it. So it's a very oppressive, we are watching kind of ideal. And it's nice to play with those kind of things as in a heroic stance rather than necessarily as a negative one. And then you can see the kind of color palettes that were used in the faction design. But I think what was most interesting about as Dragon Age developed was that it gradually took on a kind of art styling of its own, began to evolve out of the game. Because there's such a rich lore, these were some of the, this was a look that was originally experimented with in Dragon Age 2, and one of the concept artists, Nick Thornborough, was doing this work. And it was this very heavy graphical design that was later done into stained glass for the Chantry, and it tells stories from the lore of Dragon Age. And this is fantastic, and it just started to carry on. So when we got to Inquisition, we started thinking about the front end and how we could do character portrayal and all that kind of stuff. And I think someone came up with the idea of the tarot card motifs. And then what happened was that the concept artists really just took off. Matt just let them go for it, essentially. And what we got was a massive array of wonderful illustrations that sort of touch on these sort of primitive storytelling ideals that we all have from our youth, this sort of dark Europe where the grim fairy tales take place, and the art of people like Edmund Dulac, which is, wonderfully expressive. And it just went on, and it was hard to pull them back. So there was the graphical side of things, the more expressive, and then we got really into the Baroque, and that's where it got really exciting, I think. So there's this expression of anguish and strength and pain, all done through the contortions of the physical shape. I think Alessandro was talking about this earlier, and these kind of nods to the Spanish Baroque. It was the Spanish Baroque, wasn't it? Which is beautiful because it's faith-based art, and that's a wonderful, wonderful thing. No matter what you think about faith or spirituality or religion, what it has given us is a wonderful expression in its artistic sense. So, when you look at those Baroque paintings, you look at those Northern Renaissance paintings that have religious or spiritual subjects, there's a contortion and a pain and a feeling and a passion that is really compelling. And that's really what you need to imbue yourself with as an artist when you start to express these ideas. So there's some more. I think that one in the center, by the way, I think is my favorite image in the entire game. I think just this section of the artwork of the game turned out so strongly. It was just wonderful to see, and it was just an evolution of the original pillars that were set out. Because we've been working on this. I think ultimately we worked on this game for about three and a half years, maybe a little bit more, and it was a long ride. But the central pillars that were set out initially took us through, and the game as a whole, as an artistic whole, I think holds true to the diktats of the franchise, firstly, but also the vision of what that game was meant to be. It goes on and on. So what's my conclusion? You have to build and promote your primary aesthetic direction. So that's with nods to the Northern Renaissance. There's a fair amount of cinematic work in Dragon Age. We were looking at directors like Kurosawa, very strong silhouette, very bold compositional style. You have to gather your contextually relevant reference. And remember that art should support the experience and complement the narrative, not be in opposition to either. And I think that's really a warning to, in big console development, when you have teams of artists and designers and engineers and writers, conflict tends to arise from time to time. And everyone needs to understand that their particular discipline is just a part of the whole. And the great games are made when all those disciplines come together and work harmoniously. And that's not easy. It's not easy to achieve, but it can be done. And I think the final part, because games are an art form, I believe this, and it's what's kept me motivated for a long time. I've been doing this for a long time. I think my first professional gig was in 1988. So that's like 27 years. God, that's ridiculous. But what excites me and continues to excite me about games as a medium is that it's always changing. And, if there's no other message that you take away from this, it's that as artists, as creatives, you have to have a broad inspirational palette. And what that means is that you need to suck in inspiration from everywhere, right? Not just games. And the message has come loud and clear today from some of the leading art directors in the industry. So we're looking at film, you're looking at architecture, you're looking at classical art, you're looking at, you could be reading poetry, books, architecture, everything. You suck it all in as an artist, and then what you spit out or, vomit out at the end of it is your creative interpretation of all those many inspirations. And that's what pushes the medium further. It's of no value to look at just the latest great game and try and emulate that in your product, right? That's not pushing the medium, that's mimicry. We need to look further than that. We have this great thing that I believe the kids are using these days. It's called the internet. And it gives you a window on every museum and every art gallery virtually in the world. So there is no excuse for people not to take advantage of that and really gorge yourself creatively. I really urge people to do that. So art which is of value stands up to scrutiny and interpretation. I hope that is true, and I hope that the games of tomorrow and the games that BioWare and all the other great studios produce can be interpreted and can be talked about as art in a truly artistic and valid way. And that's my hope for the future. So I kind of rambled a bit there, but I guess that's my talk. So if there's any questions. Do we have time for some questions? We've got a few minutes? Or I can take it outside, not in a bad way, but we can go to the room over there and we can do. We've got 7 minutes. Okay, if anyone's got a question, if you can use the microphone there. If it was on.
Oh, it is on. Okay, cool. Yeah, so in the second Dragon Age...
is this a lore-related question?
It's related to the art direction. So in the second Dragon Age, the Inquisition, or at least the appearance of Cassandra interrogating Varric, very much gave that kind of oppressive feel to it. But in Inquisition, where the Inquisitor is the head of it, and you have so many choices in the game, why take the direction of the oppression again? Because there was some dissonance with my character, at least. I was playing a good Inquisitor, and it felt strange having all of these like fists and eyeballs and everything. So.
Yeah, that's a good question. I wish Mike Laidlaw was here to answer it for you. I think it's interesting to play with juxtaposition, right? And if you can choose to be a good or bad Inquisitor, right? You don't have to do good deeds during the course of that game. And I think the Inquisition does have all this kind of oppressive infrastructure around it. It enables you to just play with that as you wish. So it's just setting up different situations that you can play out as you wish.
Okay, thanks.
Hello.
Hey.
Fantasy games are very common. So how do you guys really set the tone for differentiating your game from all the other Sword and Magic games out there? Because, again, it's so popular. Was there any sort of key thought process that goes into it? I mean, besides, obviously, the giant presentation, of course.
Yeah, that's a good question. There is a lot of fantasy out there, and it's very difficult to try and do something that's original and engaging that hasn't been seen in a Lord of the Rings movie or Game of Thrones, right? And I think what Dragon Age has going for it is that central vein of humor that keeps it from falling into this sort of overly dark and sinister world. We don't tend to do a lot of creatures. It's not really that type of fantasy. It's basically human factions. Actually, there was a discussion going on in the studio the other week that I thought was very interesting. And it's about this idea that sometimes in fantasy games, the gods of fantasy games are real gods, right? In Dragon Age, they're not. It's a faith-based spiritual system. So the factions within Dragon Age still have the same doubts and issues and existential angst that we do, right? So I think that comes through either subtly or not, and gives you a better connection to the story and the characters of that game, because they're dealing with the same kind of issues that we deal with on a daily basis.
Thank you.
Hey, how's it going? This question is mostly about the characters and character design. Can you talk about some of the challenges from going to the Frostbite engine and retaining that kind of like stylized look in characters with something that's like a photoreal engine? where still sort of maintaining that kind of Dragon Age style of characters. It's, you know, a little bit stylized, somewhat realistic.
Yeah, slightly illustrative, right? Yeah, that was difficult because when you look at some of the games that are done with Frostbite, like Battlefield or Army of Two or what have you, and I think it's partly in the process. There's a lot of scanning work that goes into those games, you know, scanned heads and so forth. It gives you a very believable facade. All the characters in Dragon Age were handcrafted. And I think that's the difference, really, that they are, we're looking for realistic surface response, but not necessarily photorealistic fascia, if that makes sense. Yeah. And I think that sort of hand editing gives you that difference.
Without using physical reference, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I think that's it. I'm around all week if anyone wants to talk about stuff. Thank you very much.